Welcome to the South by East podcast, where we discuss culture, the scriptures, and everything in between and how they impact Southeast Topeka with your co-hosts, Jonathan Sublett and Braille Watson. Welcome to the South by East podcast, where we discuss scripture, the culture, and everything in between and how they impact Southeast Topeka. And today, I am honored on episode number 3 to have our special guest, State Treasurer Lynn Rogers. And if you don't know, he's the 41st Treasurer for the state of Kansas. He's a businessman, a former senator, a former Wichita Board of Education president. He served more than 40 years in the banking industry, spent time all over the state, traveling, helping agricultural and farmers get their financial plans and investments together. He also served as lieutenant governor from 2019 to 2021. And then he has 3 adult kids with his wife, Chris. And so he's passionate about reading, and I know that we had that in common. Yeah. And so those are some of the things I would like to get into as we discuss here. But I want to welcome you to the South by East podcast. Welcome, Lynn.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So. Yes, it's good. It's good. And so, like I was saying here, I'm always interested because when I meet another avid reader, what is the last thing that you read that made an impact on you, and why?
I have not been able to do quite as much reading as I want, but I actually started reading a biography about Frederick Douglass, and it was a really thick one, so it took me a lot longer than I planned. Yeah. But what I loved about it, some of the great quotes, and a lot of the information, the history before the Civil War. You know, there's a lot on the Civil War, but a lot of the stuff before then. You know, when he escaped from slavery and his anti-abolitionist work, yeah, and all those kind of things. I was really there were quotes and sections of that really speak to today. I was just so surprised how different that was. So my staff gives me a hard time because I actually keep a list of every book that I've read. It goes back to 1996, and they were real impressed with that. But and I always put the name and the author and the date that I read it. And I didn't tell them that the reason I do that is so when I go to a book sale, I don't buy the same book over again. But it's the cheap side of me. But it has been kind of fun to look back over the years what I've read and what's been out there.
Yeah, so that shows how smart you are, because what I used to do is I would forget, and then I would act as if I was just bought an extra copy of it for one of my students when I was a youth pastor. Like, hey, you know what? I wanted to gift this to you. And so that shows that you're smarter than me. Now I depend on my Audible list or something like that to tell me,
did I read that or not?
Did I already read that or not?
Yeah.
And so, and then we're music lovers here. And so I wanted just to see, like, is there an album right now that has your heart that you like, man, this is something I'm listening to on replay in the car or in the shower or something like that?
I don't listen to a lot of music, primarily because I've got so many other things going on. I do try to listen to a lot of podcasts to and from when I'm on the road. I have one that's called Planet Money. It's an NPR one.
Yes.
History, today, several history things, and then there's some fun ones, the NPR Wait, Don't Tell Me, a news quiz that, sometimes makes fun of the news. So those are probably the ones that I listen to the most. I do like to listen to Christian music, and when I get a chance, when there's a station close by, I try to listen to some of those as well.
Okay.
But it's being on the road as much as I am, it's podcasts because the radio stations don't always carry very far.
Yeah, and I'm a big podcast guy also, and so even like right before this, I was listening to Love Thy Neighbor. It was just a podcast, and they had one. It was actually a re-air of a podcast on where the gospel meets student loan debt. And really interesting. And
that would be.
Yeah, and I love the Market Watch one that you were talking about with NPR. I like that one.
Yeah.
And then, or Market Watch is one from Morgan Stanley, I believe, the 3. Yeah. And then also the NPR one.
Planet Money.
Planet Money.
Yeah.
I subscribe to that one also.
Yeah.
And so those are good ones. And so.
Yeah. I try to listen to the same ones over and over again, or each week's installment, but there's so many good ones out there. They're hard to kind of limit you. So
yeah. And then movies. Is there a movie that you saw recently that you really enjoyed, and what would you rank it on a scale of 1 to 5 stars?
Again, being a grandfather to a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 6-year-old, I've seen more of their movies than probably my age. And then I do watch, some of the items on serials that are, on Netflix or those kinds of places. There was one, I think, Becoming Anna, which was a one about a woman that tried to be a socialite and kind of a.
My wife was into that.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was interesting. Under the Banner of Heaven, which is a story about some murders in Utah.
Okay.
I think those were Hulu. That was very interesting. There's been a bunch. We watch a lot of the. Public television, series.
Okay, yeah.
Those are always the historical ones are always
Yeah.
pretty cool. So with me coming to Topeka during the week and my wife, and then seeing my wife on the weekends, she's here sometimes. So we try to watch certain shows together.
Yeah.
But what I've found oftentimes is that we'll leave it at the third or fourth, and then my wife goes ahead and watches them, and I have to watch them by myself later.
Yes, yeah. For us, is we fall asleep, and one of us like, I'm just tired of watching the same episode over and over again, waiting for you because we keep falling asleep on them, and so.
Yeah, you understand.
Yes, and so, and then I'm a foodie. If you follow me on social media, my wife always asks, like, do you have more pictures of food or of the kids in your phone? And so. I wanted to know if there was since you're here during the week, if there's a favorite eating spot in East Topeka that you discovered that you like to frequent or go by.
I don't get out to a lot of places. I'm still somewhat confused by the northeast, southeast, southwest.
Yeah.
I just turn it a little bit, northeast, west, south, kind of like us in Wichita. But Taco Del Sol.
Yeah, that's on the east side. Yeah.
I got introduced to that one. That one's, and sometimes we have Taco Tuesday at the office. And one of the staff go out and get those. Those are really good. And other than that, most of them are downtown if we eat out. So
down that strip are a lot of jewels for Topeka.
Yeah.
And so there's a little place you pass called Harold's Prize Package.
Oh, okay.
That's right there. It has one of the best burgers in Topeka.
Oh, okay, good.
That's right there on that same little strip. And so, and then Mi Puebla just opened. You can get some chicharrones, and it has a great barbacoa and everything right there.
Okay.
On the same little street as Taco Del Sol.
Well, I tell staff, I try to get out of Topeka a couple days a week to travel around the state, and they know that if we can find a good burger place, a good ice cream place, or a good pie place, then I approve of the travel schedule.
Yes.
So I'll just have to start doing that here, in this part of town. So,
Yes. And then, this summer I took a vacation with my family, and we went to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
And we drove, but on the way there, we were going to spend some time with some friends in Nashville first, and then in Knoxville right after that, before driving on to Myrtle Beach. And we were driving through Tennessee, and I saw all these political signs for chancellor. And we kept just seeing these signs for this guy running for chancellor. And I looked at my wife and I said, "What is a chancellor?" We had never heard of it.
Yeah.
And so I think what I feel like, I always hear statistics of so many more people vote in a presidential election than they do in non-presidential elections, or even on presidential ballots, people will go in and vote for the presidential candidate, but leave a lot of other stuff blank. And I think a lot of it happens because of what I experienced while I was driving on that vacation, where you pass by these signs, you're like, I have no idea what that person does and how they impact my life or whatever else.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. But when I introduce you as state treasurer, can you tell us just in a layman's terms, real simple, what does the state treasurer do?
Well, people don't want to make a mistake oftentimes, so they won't vote. But the positions that are lower on the ballot, oftentimes they have spend more of your tax dollars. They are more responsible for your tax dollars, and they do more things that affect your life. So school board, city council, county commission, state house, and then the statewide. I'm one of 6 statewide elected officials: governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, insurance commissioner, secretary of state, and treasurer. In essence, how I describe it is that I'm in essence the chief banker for the state. So I make sure that the bank accounts for the state are all balanced. I don't collect the tax dollars, but when they come in, I make sure they get moved to the right department, right agency. We balance those. We provide accountability and some watchdog facilities for that type of thing. We manage the unclaimed property. We help people get that back to them. We help people on education with their education savings accounts. We loan excess dollars to businesses that need it, idle state dollars that can go that route. And then there's a number of other services that we provide, make sure that the tax funds get out to the cities and counties and those kinds of things. So so it really is often similar to a lot of the things I did in my banking world. It's a lot of finance. And so it really isn't, I don't really look at it as a partisan position, but it really, you have to have somebody that knows how banking rules work. And you know, in the past, the office has kind of been used just to run for Congress, but I think there's a lot of really good things that we can use this office for to improve the financial condition of Kansans. And when we do that, then that improves the financial condition for Kansas.
Yes, yeah, and that goes right into that next question of when the average person is looking at like how what you do at this high level impacts them on a daily basis. What would I tell the average person in Southeast Topeka of, hey, when you're going to vote for state treasurer, this is how they impact your life on a daily basis?
Well, you know, besides the things that we do, it's also the things that we would like to do. You know, we have a great savings program to help people make higher education more affordable, what they're called Learning Quest 529s. It's a program that's been around for about 25 years. You get a tax benefit, and then all the earnings are tax-free. So, you know, you can put in as little as $5 or $10 to get the account started, and then you can, you know, it can grow tax-free. And then if you pull it out and use it for education, it's tax-free as well. So there's no tax consequences. You don't have to go to school and face a lot of debt. Well, we'd like to do that same kind of thing for both housing accounts and for retirement accounts. 55% of Kansans don't have any retirement savings, and that's an important thing to put money aside for. So this would be a way that we could do that. Several states are doing that, and we'd like to go with that route. I think also, I also provide a lot of advice to legislators on finances, budgets, you know, debt. We as Kansans have some of the highest debt load because over the Brownback tax experiment, a lot of that money got, you know, used up, and so we need to pay that back. So how do we get on the right path financially that way and don't bankrupt our state?
Yeah, I mean, that's so key. I just today, and I was talking to you about this on the podcast, I just heard that right now the nation has $1.75 trillion in student loan debt.
Yeah.
And it's even higher. There's even a higher amount of student loan debt than there is credit card debt.
Yeah.
And that the average person has $29,000 in debt. And so when you're talking about why young people are not buying homes, it's because they have so much debt.
Exactly.
And then that goes into why they're not putting it in their investment account.
Yeah.
And then like with the Fed hike, you know, and you're saying like, well, man, that affects if you got credit card debt or something like that, and the interest rates are swinging.
Yeah.
You're probably getting high. It's going to be harder to get mortgages.
Yeah.
And now you got this debt out here. It's going to be harder. And so all these things compound.
And what I think is interesting too, when we have the student debt conversation, there are people that want us to, you know, basically dismiss it all. And then there's a group that says, no, that's not fair. You know, they took it out, and most students did. But what the average citizen doesn't realize on those student debts is that the interest rates are 12 to 15%. So there are people that have borrowed $20,000, but they now owe, they've paid down their debt for 10 years, but they now owe $50,000. And so it's one of those things that they really will never get out from underneath it because it's so expensive to, you know, when that interest gets added.
Yeah, and I say next to God's grace, compound interest is the most powerful force in this world.
Exactly.
And it's one of those deals where people don't understand, and I tell the story all the time of how, you know, for some families, the story goes where grandpa owned 100 acres. He was able to sell 5 acres because he saw potential in little Johnny to send him to school. Little Johnny went to school, graduated, and little Johnny graduated, got a good career. Now he was able to pay for all his kids to go to school, and the family legacy changed. But when your family doesn't own land, doesn't own a house.
That's right.
Especially when you look at the gap in wealth with minority populations in our country, just because of some of the things you're talking with the Frederick Douglass book, What to the Negro is July 4th. And when you're talking about those things, now it's hard to close that gap. And you go, I'm a first generation college graduate. And so I know, but I went into chemical engineering. So I got a career that allowed me to pay off my student loans, which was different. And so the biggest gap, even Albert Mohler, I think in the 2000s, said, if you really want to get young people on the mission field, the greatest barrier to that is student loan debt.
Student loan debt, yeah.
That's what's keeping us from sending missionaries even. And so when you think about that, it's not just one group of people. It's like what you said, like with the Frederick Douglass book, so many things that he wrote back then are still applicable for today's time and different things.
Yeah.
And I think the student loan debt is one of those conversations. But that kind of goes into this thing of right now we went through COVID and it just wreaked havoc on everything. We were trying to figure out how to get people out of their houses to shop, how to keep things from not just totally dying at all. And then our leaders did what they thought was the best thing. And now we enter this period of inflation. And so leaders are doing what they think is the best thing, and only history will tell.
Yeah.
If you have perfect answers, it means that you're looking back and saying what should have been done.
Yeah.
What do you see, though, as the greatest financial challenge for families in Kansas currently and in the next 5 years to come?
Well, I think you hit on some, big issues. Debt is huge. The COVID impact. These are issues. What I see now as I talk to folks on really throughout the state, and it doesn't matter whether I'm in a rural area or an urban area, a well-to-do neighborhood or one that's struggling, kitchen table issues, making the budget. Income has not gone up well until just recently. 2008, 2009, the businesses got big increases, but there was no increase on labor. We finally now, in the last year or so, have seen some labor increases, but now that's getting eaten up by, again, business, jumping, and some of that I just see is inflation is just flat out greed, corporate greed, which is really difficult.
Wow.
But we've got to have these discussions on student debt, on housing debt. How do we help people, buy a house, and particularly, interest rates, mortgage rates were really low. Those have gone up. They're still lower. When my wife and I first bought a house, it was, I think 19% was our mortgage. And why we bought one at that point, I have no clue now. Looking back on it, it's probably really, really stupid. But I did know that was a way to help build our equity and our and so. But we have a lot of families that don't even have that as a possibility. And so what do we do to help people have a stable home, whether they're renting or owning a home that they can stay in? I mean, rent prices are jumping through the roof, and that's worrisome.
Hey, I want to thank you and the current leaders on both sides of the aisle for the recent passage of the state tax credit. The states around us had unfair advantages when it came to developing in communities like Southeast Topeka, because they could take the federal tax credit and stack it with their state tax credit. And so development in neighborhoods like Hi-Crest, in which we're sitting in, could develop faster. But because we didn't have that, we had a larger gap to close. And so y'all doing that hard work. And that's one of those things that the average person, I don't feel...
No, they don't understand it and don't realize how important it is that all, succeed. I mean, sometimes I worry as our culture, we're worried about, we want our piece of the pie, as opposed to how do we make the pie bigger for everybody,
Yes.
And when you're in a successful community, a successful neighborhood, they go out, they buy other things, they do other, I mean, it helps the whole community.
So we tell that story of a lot of people like, well, you just need a jobs program. And I said, but if I do a jobs program and I pour into somebody for 3 years, and he gets a better bank account, if I don't build houses, he's going to leave because his family has, like, my neighborhood that I live in now was made for military housing.
Yeah.
And so, these houses are 60 years old. We built the first house in this neighborhood in over 60 years in 2019.
Yeah.
And then, if I do housing and I don't help improve the schools, he's going to leave because no one wants to live in a neighborhood where they don't feel like their kids are going to get educated. And your kids are a product of public education.
Yeah.
And then, but if I do that, I know also from being on economic development committees and city councils and stuff like that, that businesses follow rooftops.
Yeah.
And people normally shop close to where they live.
Yeah.
And they want to know that the people that live there have expendable income, so they have to have the jobs.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, what about crime and different things of that nature? Well, how do we pay for that? It's the houses on the tax roll that we pay for police and firefighters and the infrastructure and roads. And that's always the talk in Kansas, right?
Yeah.
And so all of it's connected. And I appreciate you bringing out that point of how we're all connected, how it's not just one class of people that need help, but we all need help, whether urban or rural.
Quality of life is such an issue. You know, when I was lieutenant governor, we did the Office of Rural Prosperity, and a lot of my work was in rural communities. But what I noticed, because of my experience of growing and living in Wichita for 35 plus years, and being on the school board there, many of our neighborhoods, you know, are struggling. They were facing the same issues, you know, just the same things that you talked about.
Yeah.
And you can't just deal with one, because it's kind of like whack-a-mole. The next one pops up, and you've got something else to deal with. So you got to kind of be doing them simultaneously.
And that is so key. People are like, well, you got to just focus on one thing at a time. Like, you can't do that, because you'll never. It has to be a dynamic solution with a tight feedback loop that's multi-pronged.
Yeah.
And that's so key. And I think people think it just needs to be about my thing all the time.
Yeah.
And we miss the big picture.
And I think that's one of the things also as a state treasurer, you know, from a finance perspective, as being a statewide officer, that I can do is to help and make sure that those discussions are going on. It's not just about the banking and the savings and the unclaimed property in the treasurer's office, but how do I get state officials to recognize that we have a housing issue, that we have a savings issue, we have an economic issue, so that we're helping Kansas long term.
Clemson University just put out a study that said that a 1% decrease in food insecurity leads to a 15% decrease in youth crime.
Wow. See, those are the kind of things that, and again, being in the Senate, being a lieutenant governor, and now being treasurer, there's a lot of denial amongst our elected officials, because they live somewhat in a bubble, that, you know, that they've only been in one little community. And I think it's really, as you get out and talk to people and visit with people, you know, you realize that the world is not just my bubble. You know, there's a lot of different things going on in every community. So.
Yeah. We're going to get ready to take a quick break right here, and then we'll be right back with you on the South by East podcast.
Are you interested in podcasting, audio, or visual media, and just don't know how to get started or take your content to the next level? Then Studio 104 was built just for you. A fully functioning audio-visual podcast studio, industry-level equipment, and an affordable price to help you make that album you always wanted, start that podcast, or even share the story of how your business is impacting the community. Book your session along with a free consultation today at www.fellowshiphighcrest.com/studio104.
Welcome back to the South by East podcast, where we have our special guest for today, a state treasurer, Lynn Rogers. And we were discussing some, right before we left, about the new state tax credit. And I know, like here, I'm a part of an organization, Sent Topeka, and I sit on the board for that organization. I founded it. And we're trying to do a 29-acre development in the community to help develop housing as a part of 30 new houses, and as a part of it also a new food co-op, because we're a food desert.
Oh, yeah.
Some retail, a medical clinic, a bank, a new community center, because Topeka only has one library, and so we want to have a branch of the library here because we're a transportation desert and different things of that nature. And so we were trying to explain like why that's so beneficial. Before, with the state tax credit, you might have gotten like 20% of the capital you needed to build something like that. And right now, the conceptual number is $110 million that we're going to need to finish out the 29 acres, right? But with the state tax credit, with the federal tax credit, now we can get up to 40% of the capital we need to that. And that's just a huge benefit that maybe sometimes pushes the developer, a local community development organization in a low socioeconomic income area, one that's been traditionally redlined, kind of over the top, and being able to bring something from a dream to reality.
Yeah, because you know, developers have, it's their own money and only so much of it, and so if they're going to make money, you know, at a development of some kind, they're going to go where they can make the most money.
Yes.
And, you know, in most cases, that's going to be probably middle to upper class, you know, much more expensive houses. But if they know 40% is covered, that's really going to give them a reason to do business in this area.
Yeah.
And it lowers their risk, which, and again, it's one of those things that this is where we need the housing, these kinds of communities.
And here's the deal. Here's the reality of it. I think my time out in the secular workforce, in the for-profit workforce, helped me on this, and because I did capital projects, and I said, a lot of these things we're wanting to do because we know it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But I said, guys, this is a business deal where people don't just do deals like this because it's the right thing to do. And so that's why we did an economic impact analysis where we ran the numbers where, yes, it's going to cost $110 million, but that project over the first 10 years will bring $163 million back to the area.
Yeah.
And so it becomes smart investment that's actually going to bring a return because that's what keeps a business going, right?
Yeah.
And we have to be looking at sustainable solutions in that way. And that kind of goes into kind of my next question. You see the things coming down the pipe for families in Kansas and what's impacting them in the debt and COVID recovery and wages not rising as high as cost of living. And it's been said that when America gets a cold, Black America gets the flu. But I believe that includes not only just African Americans in our country, but also those families that live in low socioeconomic areas like Southeast Topeka. And how can we best walk beside our most vulnerable to help them prepare for what you see coming?
Well, again, I think it's kind of like when you're looking at the quality of life issues or things. I mean, you can't just do one thing. I think the folks that have the privilege need to make sure that they're exposing themselves and know people and talk to people in all areas. Again, going back to my experience in the rural Office of Rural Prosperity, I often said that, when rural America, rural Kansas suffers, the whole state suffers. And that's the same way in our urban areas. And Wichita is a community that's pretty mixed. I mean, I actually live in a food desert myself. Mm-hmm. I'm in a very nice home, but there's some very poor, neighborhood or not neighborhoods, but poorer homes, very poor quality homes that I see it very close in my own neighborhood. So I think it's exposing ourselves, it's understanding and looking at the problem from a different perspective, and realizing that we're not going to solve it instantly, but how do we make incremental steps.
I agree, and I was surprised that several months ago I learned that Bill Gates is the largest owner of farmland in America.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
And I said, I just went through this thing. I was a part of the inaugural cohort for the first Kansas Future Fellows program.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, if we're not careful, someone who doesn't live in Kansas may own more of Kansas than Kansans do. And is that what,
Actually, that is somewhat true in our rural parts. Johnson County residents own more of rural Kansas than some of our rural counties, partly because of generational transfer of assets.
And that's what I was trying to say is we have to care about rural Kansas. And one of the theories I live by, I call the collective thread theory.
Uh-huh.
And I said, I believe we all make up the fabric of Kansas.
Yeah.
And that each person makes up a thread in that fabric.
Yeah.
And you have peace and unity when all the threads in fabric are tight.
Yeah.
And when we see someone falling out of the fabric of Kansas, we have to wrap ourselves around them and over them and under them hundreds and thousands of times to pull them back into the fabric.
Yeah.
Because that's how change is made.
Yeah.
We have to be a state where every thread matters, no matter if you live in a well-off neighborhood or a low socioeconomic neighborhood, but every thread matters.
Yeah.
Those in rural Kansas and those in urban Kansas.
Yeah.
And so I totally agree with that.
But I think when people see, a project like what you're talking about succeed, and even the dream stage of it is great for a community, actually for the community you're in, but also for other communities to realize, wow, that's what we need to do. And we saw that. I've seen that throughout my 37 years in Kansas. Is many of the problems that we're facing, they're faced in every town or every community. And if they see one place where it succeeds, they'll go and ask, and you can duplicate a success, but sometimes being the first one makes you it's difficult because there's a lot more work.
Trailblazing is hard.
Yeah, it is.
And it's a build-bridging thing. And so, and my friends from rural Kansas say, man, we're cheering for you, Jonathan, because if you can get it to work, they said the exact thing. If you can get it to work in Hi-Crest, then we can get it to work here.
Yeah.
And then right now, we need that because the average African-American kid in my community is slated to make $19,000 a year for household income at the age of 35. And the average Hispanic kid is slated to make $22,000 to $26,000 a year. And just so you know, Hi-Crest is a third. It's a third white, a third African-American, a third Hispanic. We're one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Topeka, and we're also one of the most dense. And we have one of the highest transition rate inside the city. And so this means that a kid that grows up in our neighborhood will likely grow up in poverty. They'll likely live in poverty for the rest of their life. And not only that, their children will likely follow that trend. How do we break that cycle?
Well, I saw it, again, going back to my school board experience, we'd see kids drop out of school as a sophomore or junior, and they could get a job for $10 an hour, and they were excited, and that made big bucks, and they thought they were, top of the world. But then they realized 10 years later they were still only making $10 an hour. They now had a wife and some kids, and they weren't going to move beyond that. So I do see that education is going to have to be key, but that's a struggle too, because oftentimes communities don't want to put money into our struggling neighborhoods.
$1 million blocks.
Yeah, and parents are if you're working 2 or 3 jobs, it's oftentimes difficult to connect with the school, or people don't even understand the mindset or the philosophy or even the culture of a school. It's beyond them, at that standpoint. Yeah. And so we've got to break it down into, I think, smaller increments. One of the things I encourage is making sure that people are reading to their kids. And if you're a struggling reader, don't feel bad about reading a kid's book to your kids. I mean, even just looking at the pictures, you're exposing them to something that will do great things for them. And I think, again, coming alongside people is really key. But when you've got a family, in a community, I guess over the years too, as I've seen when we've moved into a block, we've moved 2 or 3 times in just the same neighborhood, but oftentimes when we moved there, neighbors didn't know anybody. And so I would go knock on doors and introduce myself. And just after a year or two, by getting to know your neighbors, you're a much closer knit community. Yeah. People are watching out for each other. So I think there's a lot of little things that we can do if we think beyond ourselves.
Pulling them into the fabric. And I love what you said about reading. I was telling you right before we started that I plan to run for Senate District 19. That's going to be this newly created Senate District in 2024. And one of my ideas is, because of my love for reading, is I want to, as I knock on doors, I want to help families get signed up for the Dolly Parton Library.
Oh, yeah.
And one of my dreams is to knock on all 2,064 doors in my neighborhood and check to see if the families are signed up for the Dolly Parton Library. It's free. Oh, it's available. Yeah. They get books delivered to the house. Because we know the number of words a kid hears before the age of 5 directly impacts their ability to read, and their ability to read directly impacts all their future learning achievements going forward.
We've signed them up for our grandkids, and they're great books. I would encourage, and the state has actually, even this last budget year, has put some money into it, and then along with local sponsors, it is well worth it. Every dime will pay back probably $1, by the time we're done with that.
Yeah. So. And what conversations are being held at the upper levels of our government about the financial realities of traditionally redlined areas like Southeast Topeka?
We as a state, we've not invested much in housing. There's been we have an organization called Kansas Housing Resource Corporation, and they're actually, if people are struggling right now with maintaining or paying their rent or paying their mortgage, there is some federal COVID money that's available. Yeah,
CARE fund. Yeah.
I encourage people to make sure that they call on it. I mean, we've got families from all over the state that are taking advantage of that. That's what it's for. But I think the money that has been allocated has gone to moderate priced housing, and as a state, we have seen a huge impact. I think for the $2 million that the state spends, we get a $10 million payback. And now this year, because of the housing study, we got started under Office of Real Prosperity. And what we found there was that it didn't matter if you're in a rural neighborhood, an urban neighborhood, we needed housing. There's got to be more places. That is making an impact. I think the legislature put almost $50 million into housing this year.
And there's two things on what you just said. You went there. And so if I can lean in, one, my organization, like we have properties that we rent out, and then I have a separate business with some
Doing
friends.
Doing that yourself, yeah.
And some of our tenants have had to use CARA, but we've heard that CARA is probably ending in August, whatever. Is there the thought? I know they just put a fresh amount of money for homeowners, but the money for renters is getting ready to run out.
I have not heard, to tell you the truth. I can do some checking and see what I can find.
And then the other part of that is I was so excited when I saw that KHRC launched, that's Kansas Housing Resource Corporation. They launched the Moderate Income Housing Program.
Yeah.
But it's only for counties that are under 60,000.
Yeah.
And when I brought that up, I brought up what you said earlier, that when I travel around with my friends from rural Kansas, they have the same needs in rural Kansas that I have here in southeast Topeka. And I said, man, if we were eligible for that program, that would push us over in a lot of things. Like right now, we're working with Kansas State to develop Topeka's first net zero house.
Oh, yeah.
Where families' cost of living, where we could use that money in a moderate income housing program to help close the gap in putting some more families in homes, but we're not eligible. And the person who led the housing study for the state of Kansas was actually from Nebraska.
Yeah.
And she said, you know what, we discovered in Nebraska the same thing. When we first rolled out our plan, we had it just for rural, small counties. But then in the next year, we had to change the program to expand it because we saw what you're bringing up. And I was wondering if there's any plan to expand it to traditionally redlined or low-income neighborhoods where we could also access those moderate income housing.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to have a voice like yours and even your podcast listeners, having them speak up and talk about those kind of things. Because again, that kind of conversation, I'm not sure if it is being always talked about. Now, one thing that I know has happened with KHRC, Kansas Housing Resource Corporation, is they put a task force together to kind of modify and change it. And we're actually, we have a housing lending program in the state treasurer's office. We can loan up to $60 million of idle cash, but a dime has never been loaned out on it. And so we need to go back to the legislature and revamp that. And that would be a great thing for us to be able to say is, hey, this would be a good use. Here's a way to do that. And it takes one person to bring that idea to the legislature so that it gets into a future bill.
I would love, if you're looking for community members to be a part of some kind of task force on that, I would love to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And just to speak into that. And then just because you're here and I don't know where else, like sometimes I hear stuff and I'm like we were talking about that as much as I try to listen, I didn't major in finance, right?
Yeah.
I majored in bonds, hydrogen bonds and carbon bonds. That was me.
And I don't have the science brain, so
yeah. And so I heard about this thing. I fostered and adopted 3 kids, and we're behind. Because of that, we're behind on saving for college and all this other kind of stuff. Now, luckily, if they go to school in Texas, they get college tuition for free because of the program.
Oh,
Because we brought them from Texas with us.
Yeah.
But I have a problem that I cry every time they leave the house.
Yeah.
And so
we don't want them to do that.
And so I'm like, I can't send my kids to college in Texas. I thought I was going to send them to college in Texas. I can't send them now. And I heard about this thing called a LIRP, a life insurance retirement plan. And they said, this is one of those compound interest accounts that you should get your kids rolled into. And I'm suspicious on stuff too. And I'm like, man, is this I never got into crypto because I figured when things like that, normally the people who really have money they were in it from the beginning and they've already jumped out by the time the layperson gets access to it.
Yeah.
And it's just a report that came out recently how disproportionately people in low-income communities and people of color are the ones in the crypto markets, and they're the ones being taken advantage of right now and suffering all the losses in the market that we're seeing. And so I was wondering, do you know anything about these lurk tools?
Well, the one rule I would make or suggest to anybody when they're looking at a financial services product, whether it's a checking account, a savings account, or all kinds of things, annuities and even life insurance, is if you don't understand it, don't buy it.
Yeah.
Make sure that you understand it well enough that how it works, and then once and when I say don't buy it, I don't mean ever. I just mean find out what it means and how it works.
Yes.
And then when you're comfortable with it, go ahead and use it. There's some, crypto's the same way. I've never felt comfortable with it, so I've not gone into it. You're kind of the same way. The folks that made the money are out of it while everybody else has to ride, the ride down. On life insurance, typically, and I have whole life insurance. It's a plan where like if I put $100 in, some of it goes to pay for the life insurance, and some of it builds what's called cash value.
Yeah.
And then after a number of years, that cash value will be worth some money. There's another philosophy that you buy
term
and then invest the difference.
I have my life insurance license at one time, and so I have term and
And the problem with term is whole life will stay. If you buy it when you're young, it'll stay low. Term will go up, but at some point, you'll have more investment. What I would recommend, we've got several programs for savings for college. One is our Learning Quest 529. You get a tax deduction, and then the earnings are tax-free. We also have a program for folks with low income. It's called the Kansas Kids Match Program. And if you're 200% of poverty or less, if you put in up to $600, the state will match $600. And so you can start that at $10 a month and save up to $100 and go that route.
And if we can get the links to that, we can put the links
in
the links to the podcast, so you can get to both of those two resources that Lynn just shared with us. So that if you're interested in those, then you can get to those resources that he mentioned.
We also, under that same education tab, we have something called Scholar Shop, which is a partnership with Sally Mae, and it's $30 billion worth of scholarships, over I think 5 million scholarships that are available. So you go in and create an ID, and if you've been involved in school activities or church activities, you could see what you could qualify for. And we get a number of kids in Kansas every year that get some of that money as well. Again, just to make college education more affordable.
Man, we have to get the resource to that, and also the was it $60 million that you said that was
for the lending program.
So we
and that's what we're trying to do as a treasurer is how do we focus on ordinary Kansans to figure out what we can do to help them. One of the things that happens to me is I go out and do a lot of unclaimed property, and we have not done a good job in our office of reaching out to communities of color, Hispanic or African American. We're starting to put some of our documents and marketing materials in Spanish. We're reaching out. We've tried to diversify our staff more. We have $400 million of unclaimed property that belongs to Kansans, and it's a bank account or even a payroll check that they don't know that they didn't get. And so
we talk about this. Yeah, we talk about this. And when I came to your office and met you the first time, of how just the stigma of, I've gotten some of those calls from Texas and stuff, or letters, and I've ignored every one of them because I'm like, this is a scam, first of all, because nobody's giving me anything for free. And then there is still a boundary to cross when it comes to officials and trust. And that's why our community partners are here to help do that. And so if we can be a part of helping communicate anything in any way, I want to open that up. Like any information that we can put out on social media, podcasts, we can do any of those things because we want to help get it out. And man, I got you gave us so many great tools that I want to make sure that we get the links to put all that in. And I want to leave an open door anytime you want to come back and talk, because I just felt like I've learned a lot and got a lot from this. But then this kind of ending it here, going here. Well, a little bit. For a family living in Hi-Crest, the typical low socioeconomic family, and there's a diversity here, but a low socioeconomic family, what is the top tool you would recommend?
Well,
Financial tool.
Financial tool. I would say find a place where you could open a savings account and you can start putting even a little bit, $5 or $10 a week off, and build that up and set a goal. Maybe the first one is $100 in savings, and then maybe $250, and then $500, so that you have money to pay for an emergency repair or something of that nature. And that's tough. And the only way to really do that is to start looking at what you're spending, what is absolute, and as a family, talk about where do you want to be, what are your goals, and then just start finding somebody to help hold you accountable if you need to. I remember my grandparents back in the 30s during the Depression. They would tell a story that they saved a nickel a week, and they would put that away in the bank. And by the time they retired, they had quite a bit of money but it was the consistency.
Yeah.
And they were so thrilled if they ended up with a nickel. Now, some of us, we have more outflow than we have inflow. So sometimes that's difficult. But are there things we really absolutely don't need, or are there things that we can share or work with people?
Yeah, and I agree with that. And like I told you that I was a chemical engineer, and I was able to pay off student loans, but it was a journey. I had to get a cosigner for my first apartment. I couldn't afford any of that kind of stuff, and I lived in a small apartment for a long time in order to be able to afford that and to be able to pay cash for me to go through seminary and to pay that off, just because of the hole I was digging out of. Like my first debt was medical debt. Yeah. And it took a lot. I was really broke, making a lot of money for a long time. And I know still, like, within a 10-minute drive radius of where you're sitting, 24% of families spend 50% or more on rent.
On rent, yeah.
And I remember
that's tough to get out of. I mean,
that's tough to get out of. That's tough to. And so, like, somebody told me about Dave Ramsey, and I started looking at his stuff. First thing he says is get a $1,000 emergency account, and I was like, if I sold everything in my apartment, I couldn't get $1,000 from this.
That's right.
And so
I think that's why it's so important to set something realistic. If it's an account at the end of 2 months where it's $10, then that's $10 more than you had. And,
yes.
And I think the other thing for people to realize too is you didn't get into this boat overnight. You're not going to get out of it overnight.
That's so key.
So give yourself time.
And it might be what you do today might not benefit you personally, but may put your kids in a better place for future generations. It goes back to that bridge building and blazing pathways going forward. Man, I've so enjoyed our conversation today and you being here. I feel like I've learned something. I feel like our audience is going to gain something great out of this. And just thank you for being on the South by East podcast and discussing things that will impact Southeast Topeka and our finances, and from the things from our state government level and tools that are out there. Be sure to check the podcast notes, because we'll get all those things to you, and be looking for our next installment of the South by East podcast in 2 weeks. All right, we're going to go into some bonus time here, actually, because as we ended, we recognized there was still something left on that bone, and so we just want to go back into it a little bit. And it's around what I found was this. I was joking yesterday. It was hot. It gets hot here in Kansas. I don't think it's fair. Here's why I don't think it's fair: because you get snow.
Yeah, that's right.
So if you get snow, it shouldn't get hot.
It keeps the average right.
Yeah, and so, but I said the most privileged thing I did yesterday was I was cold in a restaurant I was in, and so I just came out of the restaurant with my jacket on and got in my car and drove in my air-conditioned car with the jacket on, and then I needed gas, so I realized that I got out of my truck and walked into the gas station in the middle of this heat wave with a jacket on. I was like, man, if this ain't privilege, I don't know what it is. In the same way, I was able at that point in my life to apply the Dave Ramsey principle. Now, one of the things I did too is there were some ladies in my community who started couponing, and they started saving so much money couponing that they were able to start living on one income for their family. Yeah. And so I had them teach me how to coupon. And so here's this single guy walking around with this trapper keeper with that coupons everywhere, and I'm couponing with all them. I'm swapping coupons with moms. But then I looked back, right? When I sold my house, and I had made it. I lived in a subdivision now. I had 2 cars in the garage. I was living my dream. I had my dream home, and I sold it and moved into some low-income apartments to start doing the work that I do now. And I had to sell almost everything I owned. And I realized that I had become privileged overnight.
Yeah.
And I realized that Dave Ramsey's material didn't deal well with generational poverty because I couldn't really get the rest of my family to really adopt those principles because they were not in the same kind of situation that I was in. And most of the people that I lived around in the community couldn't really do what Dave Ramsey was saying. It was just too big of a step. It was too far out there. It didn't fit. And I know sometimes we can look at that and think it's because a person is not applying themselves or whatever else. I tell people, I said, you meal plan when you know where your next meal is coming from.
Uh-huh.
But when you don't know where your next meal is coming from, then that hot and ready from McDonald's looks real good. And so, what tools have you found that are good in breaking generational poverty? And how have you seen, even you have diverse experience also, how have you seen, even the adaptation of people trying to use Dave Ramsey's tools, different things of that nature, and how that works?
Just for me personally, I grew up poor. I grew up on a farm, and I remember getting my first new pair of pants when I was going into 7th grade. I was so proud of these pants. They were a little flare, and it was one of those things I was going to be pretty cool. And everybody else noticed that it was a new pair of pants too. But what I realized was that I did not grow up as a generational poverty person. My mom had grown up in a pretty well-to-do home, and then the reason we were poor was my dad was trying to buy a farm and work and all those kind of things. Yeah. And so, generational versus one time or short term, it's a whole different animal. Yeah. I because of her experience, I knew how to operate in a more well-to-do community, and I think we lose as we get. The longer we have our privilege, the more we lose focus of generational poverty, and we just think, well, you just need to. And I've had some of my friends say, "Oh, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps," and I told one of them, I said, "You don't, as a farmer, you don't start with 1,000 acres and say you're pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
Come on, man.
You may have doubled it, but it's still one of those things. We're talking about people that don't have boots. It's one of those things that
they don't have straps to pull.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things we have to whether it's Dave Ramsey or whatever, there's a lot of different tools that you can use for financial matters, but I think particularly being around people that have lived it like you did, and getting advice that way is big. And again, just taking small incremental steps, realizing that you're not going to just get out of it right away. And like you mentioned earlier, if you're paying 50% of your income for housing, for rent, and it's going to go up again, it's going to be tough to save anything, and so it's going to be tough to do that.
Yeah, and I just look at, and people don't always get the fact that for the developer, it's tough also. Prices are going up, so it's getting those aids, like you're saying, that's why when you was talking about those tools for lending, those tools for, we were talking about the state tax credits and stuff like that, it's we still got to find money to develop these properties in these neighborhoods, and banks don't really want to lend to you in those situations either, right? They're looking at margins, and so
and they've got regulators that are telling them what they can and can't do, and so it really does take foundations. It takes organizations like yours. It takes individuals that'll be willing to step up, and then I think also that we speak up to our elected officials and say these are real struggles. They're not make believe.
Yeah, and right now there's a group of us in town that are trying to get some kind of accountability in place for our financial institutions in regards to their CRAs. Yeah, because right now in Topeka, there's no accountability for how our financial institutions are spending our Community Reinvestment Act dollars, which there are federal regulations that those are supposed to be going back into neighborhoods like this, to help us close the gap.
Yeah.
But right now, we can't see where that's happening.
And those red line decisions made, 50 years ago are still affecting the neighborhoods today,
Yes.
And we've got to understand that.
I was like, it's a strange thing, and I haven't verified this, but somebody was saying on some of the coast, some of the bridges were built at a certain level to prevent buses from going under them, like towards the beaches, so that cars could pass through them to go to the beaches, but that public transportation couldn't do it to keep certain people away from those. And how I've seen this a couple of years in a row, how minority communities are 5 to 10 degrees hotter than suburban communities and more well-to-do communities because they intentionally didn't plant trees in minority and red-line communities.
Actually, we just saw, there was a big article in Wichita about that where we've lost a lot of our tree cover and our, struggling neighborhoods have had worse because they've just been cut down and not replaced. At least in some of the more well-to-do neighborhoods, they've replaced them and they're starting to grow back. But big time.
And then just recently in Texas, there was a HOA, a homeowners association, that voted to not allow any Section 8 renters or homeowners to live in their neighborhood. So they were making all the landlords kick out all the Section 8 residents in their neighborhood. And when you have stuff like that happening, you're questioning the motive behind it, right?
Yeah.
And you had people that were saying like, hey, I have a disability. I've served, I have a disability to where I need these helps now.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, where's our compassion? Where are we going as a society when we make decisions like that?
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to what you said and what I was saying, that collective thread and fabric, and then of getting out and meeting your neighbors. And I feel like there's so much fear in our society. Even you, like I so appreciate you sharing about you growing up on the farm. Because I've told the story before of how in college, at one point, I only had one pair of pants, right?
Yeah.
And so your new pair of pants in 7th grade matches well with my one pair of pants in college, right?
Yeah.
And although you may sit as a state official and I might sit as the pastor of a small church in a low-income neighborhood, we have more commonality than what people would like to see. And I think we need that. We need to see that more of, I know you see him on TV, but he's just like, he got a lot in common with you. He knows the struggle.
And I think that's what people need to understand is that, we need to be genuine with one another. We need to be asking questions, listening. And those are the things I sense sometimes as a culture, we love to fight and we like to highlight what we disagree on. But again, even in the legislature, when I served there, we probably agreed and voted 100% to nothing on more than we did anything else. I mean, there were a few issues that were hot buttons, but that's not what really should define us.
No, and we have to keep leaning into that. We have to keep leaning into that and saying we got to stop looking for Superman.
Yeah,
I believe we look for Superman too much of these big sweeping things that are going to solve all our problems, and that's just not going to happen, right? Because every solution brings another problem. We just need to be cognizant of the problems that our solution now creates.
Yeah.
And say progress over perfection.
Yeah, when I was on the school board, I served in Wichita for 16 and a half years, and that wasn't a simple job. I mean, it was non-paid. We spent probably 20 to 30 hours, volunteering. Yeah. But what was interesting, one of the most common phrases that I heard people ask me was they'd say, Lynn, if you just did this would fix all your problems. And one night I had 3 people in a row tell me that. And I said, the third time, I finally said, is it this or this? And I said, well, why would you say that? Because I said, the last 2 guys just told me that's all it would take to fix the problem. And it kind of, the light bulb went in the guy's head and said, oh. And I said, if it was that simple, we would have done it,
Yeah, one of my favorite podcasts, Southside Rabbi, if you ever check it out, by one of my favorite Christian rappers leads it, a guy named KB. And their motto on there is no easy answers. And I love that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
No easy answers. And a lot of times we get stuck in thinking that it's this easy answer that's going to solve everything. And you're like, man, if that's the case, then are you saying like there's no intelligent people in the room that would just say, yeah, we're gonna do this and all of our problems are solved? Like I got this magic bean, and we're just gonna climb it, and then we're gonna steal the Giants' gold.
Yeah.
And so like that doesn't happen.
And I think like whether it's Dave Ramsey or another financial, fitness, there are a lot of education opportunities and programs, but we can't always do one size fits all. But you can take ideas from that and expand it or reduce it down and say, I can't do this, but I can do this much of it.
Because I do believe in his snowball principle of when you pay off something, using the money you paid off to pay on the next.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's key. Is by saying, man, I don't agree with this principle doesn't mean that everything is trash.
Right. Yeah. You don't need to throw it all out.
And that's the deal. Is like we got to come. If we can do this with our enemies, and Dave Ramsey is not my enemy, but I'm saying like with people who have different ideologies than we do on different topics, if we can start the conversation by saying, what are they saying that I agree with, that I can hold on to?
Yeah, yeah.
And then let me build a bridge from there.
Yeah.
I think our conversations will go different. I think we go in too often with the motive of convincing someone to my point of view, rather than saying, one, I want to understand what they're dealing with, and then two, I want to see where we can meet.
Yeah.
And I just see that like when it comes to our leaders, like I have some friends that are in the military or have been in the military, and I'll hear people saying like the military should do this, and I'm like, man, I'm pretty positive that whatever we see on TV is not all the information that exists in this situation.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you something. There's a difference between playing Call of Duty at home than actually being in a war zone. Just like it's one of those deals of there's a difference between saying, man, we should go to war over in this place and having bums rain on where you live at.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I always, that was a lesson I learned when I first went on the school board in Wichita. The first time I joined the table, I sat down and I had realized, or I guess what I thought of was before then, I could tell you exactly how they should vote on this issue, that issue, or whatever, because I saw it on TV. The first time I sat down at the table, I realized, wow, I have a 200-page packet of information that I just read. And so I know a whole lot more. And all of a sudden, I didn't know how to vote necessarily because I realized it affected their kids, their livelihood. And so they do have a lot more information.
Hey, and I know people are not reading that. I say this, we don't live in a illiterate society for the most part. We live in a illiterate society. A society where people choose not to read. They tell us we can't make a social media post over 150 words because people won't read it. And so you're talking about a 200-page packet to vote on school board issues? And I'm going to tell you something. COVID ended everything I thought I knew about education. Yeah. When I had kids sitting around me on Zoom call at the same time, and two of mine are twins. Yeah. And I'm trying to be on three different Zoom calls right now.
Really appreciate teachers in terms of because that's going on in their classroom every day, 25, 30 kids, so.
I love my kids and feel like I would give my life for them. And I almost took a life during COVID. I mean, it was so.
Well, and I think that's the thing is we and then again sometimes we take ourselves way too serious that we know everything or and we have to realize that each day is a journey and each day we learn a little bit more and I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago because I've learned so much more. Yeah. So that's okay.
That's good. And I know areas that I've moved on and think differently on. Yeah. And it surprised some people, and I'm like, man, if you stay stagnant, then that should say something about you also.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
But I appreciate this bonus time, and you've been willing to do this and spend this time with us. I think it was necessary. I think it was a good add to the conversation that we were able to revisit these things. Thanks once again for this time.
You bet. Anytime. I'll be glad to come back. And we do want to interact more, with our various communities, not just in Topeka, but Wichita, Johnson County, Wyandotte County, rural Kansas. We, as an elected official, I really represent the whole state. I need to really serve everybody.
Yeah, and if there's other people you think we should talk to, you let us know, and we'll open the door for South by East podcast for
Perfect. All right.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the South by East podcast, where we meet you at the intersection of culture and community. Want to get the 411 on all the latest intersections? Join our public Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/South by